I have kids, and we both have life. Additionally, you are aware of the labor and we continue to be grateful to Paul now for this is what I saw when I left the factory in 1960. Ringo Starr the famous, what I've done the Beatles drummer is still a symbol of eternal rock and roll, love, and peace. However, in spite of the band's lasting worldwide, Ringo, the famous, has an unexpected worry. Regarding the future, is it feasible that the Beatles' legacy is among the most recognizable bands in history can be found at danger of disappearing due to changing listener habits and musical trends, considering the difficulties in remaining current at the age of 84 to younger generations? According to Ringo Starr, the Beatles' culture impact could be in jeopardy. The Beatles, however, remained praised as one of the best bands ever throughout history. Ringo Starr has stated worry about the speed at which trends in the modern day, music and culture are dynamic. Where people's attention spans are shorter, the dominance and virality of streaming platforms hits frequently eclipse entire albums. The manner that individuals listen to music has significantly altered from the Beatles' prime. One of the difficulties Ringo observes are the fading acknowledgement of the Beatles as a transforming influence in younger music. Listeners used to contemporary digital platforms and production styles might not be able to connect to the analog sound, considering their catalog's slower tempo. The emphasis on singles rather than albums via websites such as TikTok and Spotify stands in stark contrast to how the Beatles composed their music as a whole. Pieces intended to be fully enjoyed. Ringo has admitted that to maintain the band's influence, more than sentimental recountings, he perceives a must come up with new ways for the band to legacy. As discussed with remarks in an interview with Rolling Stone, he said, "You must interact with younger generations where they are trapped with outdated methods, doesn't work no more." In addition, there are still arguments regarding their historical significance have appeared online among younger audiences. The band is criticized by some as being overpriced or irrelevant to the current world. Even though these criticisms continue to be a minority, they fuel anxieties about how the band's standing could change eventually unless proactive measures are taken. To emphasize their ongoing significance, Ringo's concerns are not completely unfounded given the existence of the Beatles without social media in this day and age, streaming as well as a wide variety of songs industry environment. Unless their music is still being updated for the current platforms or incorporated into existing discussions on culture, that the band's enormous contributions run the risk of being less available or valued in the future generations. In spite of the difficulties by the quickly changing music scene, there are proactive measures being done to guarantee the Beatles are still an essential component of Ringo Starr's musical and cultural background. He has been leading the charge in many of these initiatives in conjunction with Paul McCartney's use of contemporary channels and partnerships to maintain their music pertinent, and among the most important actions in the past few years have been the publication of fresh documentaries and recordings that have been restored and provide an intimate peek at the Beatles' creative. Analyze the Beatles documentary from 2021. Peter Jackson's film Get Back was a revelation for both new and existing fans by displaying an unprecedented studio video and providing insight into their cooperative dynamic in the series. Brought a fresh understanding of Ringo the band's genius. Claims that project served as a chance to refute enduring misconceptions about the Beatles' last years that were broken. During an interview, he said in an interview with USA Today, "People always concentrate on the negative aspects of the end, but this demonstrated the happiness and laughter and our affection while creating music together." Excluding retrospectives, both Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney have liked seeing live performances as a means of engage fans of all ages. The all-star band's Ringo tours continue to attract large crowds in 1989 and assemble renowned musicians to play both classic Beatles songs and their own songs. These performances don't solely as a musical celebration, but as well as a link between times, teaching younger people Beatles tunes audiences through in-person interactions. Furthermore, the Beatles catalog has been restored digitally and reissued on streaming services to accommodate contemporary listening tastes. Sargent's remastered versions Pepper's Club Band, Lonely Hearts, and Abbey Road raised the bar for the recording's clarity, guaranteeing that could sonically compete with today's. These releases' music has been alongside creative marketing advertisements like interactive content on limited edition vinyl and social media pressings to appeal to both sentimental older Paul's listeners and inquisitive younger fans. Additionally, McCartney has worked with artists of today, such as Kanye West and In a Sense. Rihanna is fusing several musical genres. That quietly maintains the influence of the Beatles alive, but Ringo has sought a more using a classic rock style in his own work. He supports the approach of interacting with the current music landscape, continuing to pertinent in spite of Ringo's attempts. Been open about their shortcomings in interviews. He has admitted that nostalgia is insufficient to ensure the future of the band. He said, "We're pleased with all we accomplished, but you can't merely depend on your past to keep going in order to survive in people's thoughts." The Beatles' group dedication to modernization shows that remaining relevant in a constantly evolving the world needs both creativity and intentionality, but it's a steep hill to climb. Conflict and whether their legacy endures appeals to upcoming generations still to be observed in spite of their continuous attempts to continue to be relevant. Ringo Starr has agreed that the legacy of the Beatles faces actual dangers in the fast-paced and transient cultural environment, one of the greatest. Dangers are found in the quickly shifting audience behavior for music. Younger people are listening to music more frequently than ever before, preferring brief viral songs on platforms like TikTok over the in-depth exploration of complete albums that the Beatles contributed to. Ideal as a kind of art, Ringo has also highlighted how the popularity of music, a double-edged sword, accessibility, has produced a staggering amount of competing material. For an interview, he said of Rolling Stone, there is a lot of music available currently. You hope the Beatles are discovered by someone, but with so much noise around, it's more difficult. This oversupply might potentially bury even tremendous accomplishments under the bare amount of continuous data. Another, the difficulty is in the way historical context. The Beatles may eventually disappear. Flourished in an environment where their advancements in recording and songwriting techniques and cultural influence were revolutionary, yet as contemporary innovations in technology make it simpler to create complex music, the innovative features of albums such as Sgt. Pepper's or Revolver might not connect with listeners as deeply as poor comprehension of their historical relevance. In addition to changing cultural narratives, could potentially present hazards as societal norms change. More attention has been paid to the Beatles' actions and statements through a contemporary, critical vision. While these conversations are crucial because they can occasionally eclipse the band's larger, Ringo has cited this as an example of creative value. Indirectly by highlighting solidarity and optimism, declaring that, "Our music was always about love, which is what we hope people cling to things no matter what." The dispersed character of contemporary fandom additionally makes it more difficult to transmit the Beatles' legacy in contrast to earlier generations in which parents and older records or concerts were passed down through siblings. Frequently uses digital platforms make customized music bubbles without making a conscious effort to introduce younger. The Beatles may be lost to future generations. All things considered, Ringo's worries emphasize the fine line between reimagining a legacy for audiences in the present day while maintaining its original form. The risks go beyond simply vanishing into they're worried about losing what made them famous. The band is genuinely distinctive in a constantly changing musical and cultural. Ringo's landscape at 84 isn't satisfied with take a break and enjoy the Beatles' legacy. Coast on prior successes rather than keeps advocating for measures to guarantee the band continues to have cultural significance for decades to come. As he approaches, highlights genuineness, connection, and changing platforms without losing view of the band's main points. Of a component of Ringo's vision is actively reaching out to new audiences and methods that connect with the media environment of today. He has discussed the significance of changing in tandem with technology and speaking about culture in a 2019 interview with Billboard. Meeting people is essential, where they are. This theory justifies his receptiveness to multimedia initiatives such as streaming documentaries, compilations, and even animated films such as The Refurbished Yellow Submarine is currently presented to younger audiences. Ringo has further promoted the use of education as a way to keep the Beatles' narrative alive. Initiatives and programs that impart knowledge pupils regarding the history of music, including the Beatles' groundbreaking impact, has increased prevalence from universities' classes to community-based projects. These endeavors that directly link the band's accomplishments with cultural and musical importance, guaranteeing their art is still situated within. Another element of his vision is history. Focuses on spreading the word that Beatles' love and devotion are ingrained in their music. Ringo has advocated unity on numerous occasions. both in interviews and on stage, that there was more to their music than just lyrics. In 2020, they made statements on society. "Our message," he told The Guardian, "is love and peace are universal and uncomplicated. I concentrate on the fact that it doesn't age whenever I perform." This catchphrase highlights the topics of their music's relevance. Even cultural standards change, as well as Ringo sees his personal platform's cooperation as an ongoing process promote the participation of artists such as Paul McCartney, Kanye West, and ongoing endeavors involving the Beatles family like the ones of Donny Harrison. Contributions to the works of archives affirm that collaborations may both preserve and update the band's songs. According to Ringo, the future partnerships in music as well as multimedia can aid in maintaining the core of the Beatles as they unveiled their sound to new worldwide audiences in the end. The message from Ringo Starr isn't about holding on to memories, although regarding accepting development while acknowledging there are no assurances regarding the future. How future generations view the Beatles. Ringo constantly highlights one persistent optimism that their music will endure to unite individuals, just as it always has. Despite Ringo Starr's continued optimism about maintaining the influence of the Beatles, he acknowledges the unpredictable nature as well of the changes in cultural legacies over time. One of the facts he publicly addressed is the fact that no artist or band, no matter how legendary, it can't forgotten or reinterpreted in the future. Ringo has recognized for generations that while he and Paul McCartney keep up there during the history of the Beatles, there will at some point, there will be no the direct representative departed to inform their narrative, which begs the question of how well their legacy will live on without their voices. In an interview, he stated, "We keep it alive with the Irish Times while we're present, but once we leave, it's truly up to the supporters." This emphasizes the fine equilibrium between an artist's personal influence and the nature of their work kept apart from them. The difficulty arises from the naturally shifting societal values and preferences. What struck a deep chord in the 1960s is not always consistent with the perceptions of contemporary viewers. The Ringo believes that the younger the Beatles may be perceived by generations as merely another vintage band instead of though they were revolutionary leaders. Especially true when talking about cultural messages and lyrical content which occasionally don't align with today's anticipations or discussions regarding societal advancement. The more general problem of there is also the issue of legacy management. While historical personalities such as Elvis, Frank Sinatra and Presley are still there, it is evident that their impact has significantly diminished compared to their peak. Ringo appears to question whether the Beatles might have a similar outcome. Despite their unparalleled worldwide achievement in the music industry's a trend cycle that is getting faster and faster could make maintaining it more difficult. Their inclusion in discussions about culture extended term, but Ringo has furthermore acknowledged that a large portion of this is beyond control. "We simply performed our best song. And we have no control over the rest." He once stated to The Guardian that he thinks even although their tunes are timeless attributes, it will ultimately depend on upcoming generations and ardent supporters of continue their work despite the uncertainty. Pertaining to the Beatles, culture perpetuity highlights the brittleness of even the most recognizable works of art. Regardless of how permanent their position is, history might seem like Ringo Starr's today. Concerns remind us that each and every legacy, no matter how enormous, needs to ongoing work, new involvement, and above all, the audience's desire to hold on to it. Vibrant as Ringo Starr considers it's evident how the Beatles' legacy is doing. That he considers the preservation of shared accountability, even though a lot has been carried out in order to preserve their music. By means of remastered releases, live performances and documentaries, Ringo thinks the following action should be taken with admirers and upcoming generations. He frequently emphasized that the Beatles' songs aren't intended only to remain in history. It must be enthusiastically shared and honored to remain alive. In the most recent Variety remarks, Ringo emphasized the significance of using storytelling to preserve the Beatles. Pertinent if people stop discussing us, it may eventually disappear, but as long as there are stories, and there will always be music, have an opportunity to survive on. This highlights the importance of fans as instructors, and even musicians that are in passing the band's past in order to guarantee that the Beatles are still more than a passing mention. One of the concepts in music history that his accessibility is constantly emphasized. ensuring that the Beatles' songs are not just extensively accessible but also accessible to younger audiences who might not naturally feel a bond with music produced many years before they were. Streaming platforms that were born have made this simpler, but Ringo hopes it continues. Interacting with the Beatles' narrative in a manner that appeals to people in the modern world. He has implied that is equally significant, as Ringo has also listened to the song itself. Indicated that the basic ideas of the Beatles' passion of harmony and originality are what will ensure the longevity of their music if they are accepted and placed in a new setting in significant ways. That we were constantly concerned with joining forces, he revealed in a BBC interview, which doesn't actually alter anything matter in the end when you're listening. Ringo's vision transcends all. Highlighting the Beatles' achievements during their time is spent promoting new generations to establish a personal bond, adjust the music's messages to the today and continue the discussion. This call to action isn't focused on not just to fans, but to everybody with an admiration for art that transforms. The Beatles might have altered the course of history during their career, however, as Ringo has made it apparent that the world uses their legacy, which will now dictate how long will that alteration be remembered.